Alright, hello everybody. A new video for you guys today, a special one that took me a long time to make. I hope you guys enjoy. We're going to be looking at the 10 best decks from post-rotation. This new format consists of all the sets from Team Up through Darkness Ablaze, and this list is going to be my opinions on the best 10 decks that are out right now as the current format stands. Now, before we get into the list, I'm going to lay down some ground rules for the rest of the video. Rule number 1, this list is not in order from 1 to 10 or 10 to 1. I'm not going to be ranking these decks in order. I'm just going to be giving my opinion on the 10 best decks in the format at the moment come post-rotation. And I don't believe that any of these decks are going to be that much better than the other decks on the list. Some decks are going to have better matchups and worse matchups than the other decks, but as a whole, I believe that these are the 10 most viable decks at the moment since rotation has happened. Number 2, the decks that I'm featuring in this list are going to be based around tournament results, tournaments that have happened since rotation has happened, tournaments like Hexter, TCG, Top Deck tournaments, decks like the Pokédex tournament, and also the Players' Cup Invitational tournament. And number 3. So this list is going to be my opinion. So again, the list is based around the tournament results, but some decks are going to be left off this list. Some decks that you might think are going to be there, and that's your opinion, and that's great. This video is just going to be the top 10 decks, in my opinion, that are the most viable right now since the rotation happened about a week ago. Alright, with all that being said, the ground rules have been laid down. I think it's time that we get right into the list. Alright, so to start off the list, I think we should just get it right out of the way, and that's going to be the new Eternatus VMAX deck archetype. Probably the most anticipated deck archetype to come out in Darkness Ablaze, and everyone thought this deck was going to be probably the best deck in the format, and it's safe to say that those people really were not going to be that wrong. This deck is absolutely stellar. It's got an absurd amount of HP there on the VMAX, and it has a really powerful attack, as well as a really powerful ability, and with Crobat V coming out alongside it in Darkness Ablaze, this deck has really everything it needs to be the best deck in the format, or at least one of the best decks in the format. Getting into the pros of this deck, the upsides. So it's got kind of a built-in draw engine, and I say that because most variants of this deck are going to be running 4 Crobats. You need only Dark-type Pokemon in this deck, and with Eternatus VMAX, the Eternal Zone ability that you see there allows you to have 8 Darkness Pokemon on your bench, and for the more bench Pokemon that you have, the more damage that Eternatus VMAX does with Dread End. So, having 4 Crobats in your deck sort of makes sense, and it kind of gives you a built-in draw engine, and, you know, at least 4 times during the game, you're going to be able to draw cards until you have 6 in your hand, and that's without playing any supporters or any item cards. So, very, very good addition to this deck. And of course, it has huge HP. Eternatus VMAX has 340 HP, which is tied for the most among any Pokemon in the game. Of course, you're not going to get one-shotted with Eternatus VMAX, but what the 340 HP does, it kind of can get you out of the range of the 2-hit KOs sometimes. You can slap a Big Charm on Eternatus VMAX, or you can use a Mallow and Lana. You can do so many things with Eternatus VMAX. You could even switch it out to another Eternatus VMAX. There's a lot of things you can do to make Eternatus VMAX last a very, very long time. Really one of the only VMAX Pokemon that feels very, very solid in terms of a 3-prize Pokemon. And of course, it doesn't really have any dangerous weakness. So right now, Eternatus VMAX has a weakness to Fighting type and Ground type Pokemon, and right now there really aren't that many great Fighting type or Ground type decks in the format right now. There aren't any in this top 10 list, and I think the best decks you could say right now of those types would be maybe Excadrill or Phalanx V, and neither of those decks are going to be played too much, especially in the tournament format. And just to list a few other upsides of Eternatus VMAX, the Dread End attack at the most is doing 270 damage, which is pretty easy to obtain. Getting 8 Pokemon on your bench with this deck is not that hard to do, especially with the Crobats and the Zigzagoons that you play. There's also a lot of really great tech cards to run in this deck. The new Hoopa that's come out in Darkness Ablaze, as well as the new Hiding Energy that came out in this new set, Darkness Ablaze, kind of gives the other cards in this deck a bit more solidarity and a bit more consistency when it comes to adding more damage like Galarian Zigzagoon, or finishing off KOs like the new Hoopa. Now, if we go and take a look at sort of the downsides for Eternatus VMAX, there really aren't too many. I guess you could say the Eternatus VMAX deck archetype is susceptible to gusting. You're going to be having a lot of those Crobats on your bench, and they only have 180 HP, and it makes decks like ADP Zacian really easy to gust you into those Crobats and take 3 prizes. That seems like a pretty severe downside to Eternatus VMAX, but there really aren't that many on top of that. Also, it's kind of hard to KO ADP Tag Team as well as other VMAX Pokemon. So Eternatus VMAX does do a lot of damage, but when it really comes down to it, you're going to be 2-hit KOing pretty much most 2 and 3 prize Pokemon that, cards like Zacian V are going to be 2-shotting anyway. So the 270 damage is definitely impressive, but it really doesn't amount to anything too impressive in terms of 1-hit KOs. And for results, so Eternatus VMAX has been seeing a ton of play in pretty much any online tournament that has been happening post-rotation. A lot of decks sort of lost cards and lost different techs that made them good before rotation happened. Decks like Pikachu kind of have dropped off quite a bit, and Eternatus VMAX doesn't really have anything that it's losing from rotation. So it's been seeing an enormous amount of play since rotation has happened. And if we look at some of these results, it got first place at the Hegster Top Deck Tournament number 4, and it got first place at the AZLGG Sub Tournament for the month of August. It also got second at the Hegster's Top Deck number 5 tournament. And then for the Players' Cup Finals, it placed 7th and 9th, although I believe the Players' Cup Finals was won by Lucario and Melmetal, which seems to also have a pretty good matchup against Eternatus VMAX. All in all, it seems like Eternatus VMAX might very well be the best deck in format, if not one of the top decks in the format right now. Since rotation has happened, it looks like it's going to be staying for a very long time, and I don't see this deck really becoming any worse until, I guess, maybe a really good fighting type or ground type, Pokemon VMAX deck comes out in maybe a future set. ADP Zacian V, an absolute classic. Since the emergence of the Sword and Shield era, Zacian V came out in the Sword and Shield base set alongside Zamazenta V. Those cards paired perfectly with the Arceus Dialga and Palkia GX tag team card, and from that was born a very, very powerful deck. It doesn't really seem like ADP Zacian lost too much in rotation. It seems to maybe have gotten even better, and it's looking like it's going to be pretty much just as good as it has been in the last few months prior to rotation happening. If we look at some pros that ADP Zacian has, it has a busted GX attack. So Altered Creation GX, if you have the Metal Energy and the Water Energy on ADP Tag Team, it will it'll increase your Pokemon's attack damage by 30 for the rest of the game. All of your Pokemon will do 30 more damage whenever you attack your opponent's active Pokemon, but also you get to take an extra prize card when you knock out your opponent's active Pokemon, or any of their Pokemon for that matter. This means that Zacian V is not only doing 230 damage when it attacks, it's doing 260, and it's taking extra prizes when it does it. This is absolutely ridiculous. This deck has been incredible since it came out, and that GX attack is probably the biggest upside, I think, to this deck. But this deck also facilitates great tech attackers. With that GX attack, that means that all your Pokemon's attacks are doing 30 more damage, which means that a lot more tech attack Pokemon that you can incorporate into this deck become more viable. This includes cards like Milotic V to counter against Centiskorch VMAX. It also includes cards like the Duraludon, the single prize Duraludon from Rebel Clash, which is a very, very good counter option against the Decidueye card. Especially with the ADP boost, it one-shots Decidueye, and Decidueye has to hit Duraludon 3 times. So Duraludon can be a really great tech option, and also the Mawile GX can be a really great tech option as well in this deck, especially against decks like Eternatus VMAX. And then, of course, you have cards like Zamazenta V, which, prevents all damage done to it by VMAX Pokemon, which are becoming more and more popular in the format. So it kind of has a lock, like a control card built into it. And Zamazenta V only does 130 damage, but with ADP boost it does 160, and that can get the 2-hit KO on a lot of VMAX Pokemon. So that GX attack definitely facilitates a lot of great secondary attackers in this deck. Next up, also for a pro, it thrives off gusting. So because it takes multiple prize cards, when you knock out one of your opponent's Pokemon. All those Crobats, all those Dedennes on your bench are not safe at all. This deck loves to run Boss's Orders, and it loves to switch you into those, those 2 prize support Pokemon that you'll be having on your bench, and take those cards out for 3 prizes, and it only has to do it twice to win the game, and that's really what ADP Zacian is all about. If we look at some cons for ADP Zacian, again, like Centiskorch VMAX, it has a linear and predictable playstyle, so your opponent knows what you're going to be doing with this deck. It's not going to be confused by anything that happens when you're playing against your opponent. So they kind of know what you're going to do, even though they might not be able to stop it a lot of times. It definitely helps them, and they won't be kind of taken off their guard at all. It also does not like fire decks, so of course ADP Tag Team is not weak to fire type Pokemon, but Zacian V and Zamazenta V and Mawile GX are also all weak to fire if you're running those cards, and there are a lot more fire type cards in the format now post-rotation. Decks like Blacephalon, decks like Centiskorch VMAX, or even Charizard VMAX if people are running that, and also even the Mewtwo Welder deck archetype that is still relevant in the format. All are hitting weakness against some of your primary attackers in this deck, and it really kind of does not like to play against fire decks. It also relies heavily on GX setup, so this deck is not great if you haven't already set up with the ADP GX attack. It can do things, and it can do fairly well without the ADP setup with Altered Creation GX, but it really relies on it to become a top tier deck, and because of that, if you're not able to get that setup off early in the game, then you probably will not have a great chance against some of the better decks in the format. Now, if we take a look at the results that ADP Zacian V have placed in since rotation has happened, pretty consistent placements, kind of akin to what it was like before rotation happened. It got 3rd and 5th at the Players' Cup Finals. It got 6th at the Hegster Top Deck number 4, 7th at the Hegster Top Deck number 5, and 8th in the PokéX S2 Tag Bolt number 8. So very consistent placings. It seemed to be placing in the top 10, top 16 in pretty much every tournament that has come out so far, and it looks like it's going to be doing that for a very, very long time. Overall, a very consistent deck, a very great deck, a deck that we haven't seen placed first since post-rotation, but a deck that probably will eventually, just knowing how good this deck is, and a deck that seems like it's only going to be getting better with time. Next up, I want to take a look at Centiskorch VMAX. This is one of the other deck archetypes and VMAX cards that came out in Darkness Ablaze, and one of the only other decks I think that was getting a lot of praise and a lot of hype before this set came out. And with rotation just happening about a week ago, there aren't really too many cards from the fire type toolkit to be rotated out. It still has Welder, it still has Wondrous Labyrinth, it still has Giant Hearth, Heatran GX. Everything that this deck needs is still there in the standard format. And it seems to be an absolutely stellar deck, and its placements have been pretty consistent since rotation happened, but I think that it's only going to get better as this deck sort of evolves with time. Now, if we take a look at the upsides for Centiskorch VMAX, the pros, it's got great energy acceleration, and also it has really great draw support with cards like Welder. Welder is probably one of the best supporters to come out in the standard format, and it's definitely going to be seeing play in any fire deck. So any fire deck really is going to have great energy acceleration with Welder, but it also sort of has a really cool built-in energy acceleration engine. So with Gmax Inferno, you get to do 40 damage for each fire energy onto this Pokemon. Actually does 40 plus 40 more for each fire energy on this Pokemon. But after you use the attack, you get to attach a fire energy from your discard pile to this Pokemon. So that can really sort of help Centiskorch VMAX build itself up after turn after turn after attacking. And of course, with the manual attachment that you get, this deck has terrific energy acceleration. It's also able to get KOs pretty consistently on VMAX Pokemon. I believe the sweet spot for Centiskorch is anywhere from 8 energies to 9 energies onto it to do that 320, 360 damage range. That can be done pretty easily, all things considered, with a couple Welders, which, you can find those energies easily with Giant Hearth, and with manual attachments, and with the ability effect from Gmax Inferno, you're able to get those energies on Centiskorch pretty reliably before it dies, and that sets you up perfectly to get the one-hit knockouts on other VMAX Pokemon. This deck also has really good secondary attackers as well. You have things like Heatran GX, you have things like Victini, and you also have things like Volcanion, who can also do big damage and finish up KOs, and Heatran GX is probably the poster child for these secondary attackers. Heatran GX has the GX attack and the ability Burning Road, so when you switch this Pokemon in during your turn to your active spot, you get to move as many fire energies as you want from your other Pokemon to Heatran GX, and its GX attack does 50 damage for each fire energy on this Pokemon. So Centiskorch VMAX definitely has the potential to one-shot Pokemon V and VMAX, but so does Heatran GX, and being able to do those 2 attacks turn after turn can really be the difference in the game. So Heatran GX is a really very valuable secondary attacker for this deck. If we go and look at the downsides, the cons for Centiskorch VMAX deck archetype, Inteleon VMAX is a pretty popular deck now that this rotation has happened. Dragapult VMAX seems to have phased out, and Inteleon VMAX has kind of slid into its place, which is a very, very great deck. Inteleon VMAX is pretty slept on, and I think it's going to see a lot of play here in the future, and Centiskorch VMAX kind of has a pretty tough time against Inteleon. If you don't have one of the powerful like heat energies that you can put onto Centiskorch VMAX to increase its HP, or if you don't have a big charm on Centiskorch VMAX, it will get one-shotted by Inteleon VMAX's second attack there with 3 energy. Also, if your opponent, if you're playing an ADP deck and it's teched in a Milotic V, Milotic V can one-shot Centiskorch VMAX with an ADP boost. Centiskorch VMAX does have a retreat cost of 3, and with the Milotic's, I think first attack, it does 50 for each retreat cost in your opponent's, in your Pokemon's retreat. So that comes to 150 with ADP boost. That brings it to like 180, and then of course you're hitting for weakness, so that's multiplied, so that can easily get the one-shot on Centiskorch VMAX. I know that I play ADP Zacian, and I tech in Milotic V into that deck mainly for this purpose. And another downside with Centiskorch VMAX could be, I think, that it has a very linear playstyle, so pretty much everyone who's playing Centiskorch VMAX is going to be trying to do the same thing every game. They're going to be trying to set up Centiskorch VMAX early, get the welders off, set up with Wondrous Labyrinth, pile on energies, and get ready to hit big knockouts. And then maybe set up a second Centiskorch VMAX on the bench, or set up your Heatran GX to finish off those knockouts when your first Centiskorch VMAX is going to be knocked out. So definitely sort of a standard playstyle. Everyone knows what you're going to be doing with this deck. Not that that's going to matter a lot of times, but I think that not a lot of variety in some decks can be downsides, and I think that that is a downside with Centiskorch VMAX. So if we look at the results that Centiskorch VMAX has placed in since rotation has happened in some of these post-rotation tournaments, it got 5th at Players' Cup Finals, which is very impressive. It did lose, I guess it placed below Lucario and Melmetal GX Tag Team Zacian deck variant. And it also fell below Eternatus VMAX, I believe, but 5th place was really great, and I think was an appropriate place for Centiskorch VMAX to be. It also got 5th at the Pokédex S2 Tag Bolt number 8 tournament. It's funny that it got the same placement as Players' Cup Finals. It seems like 5th to 10th place is a pretty solid spot for Centiskorch to be. But also it got 9th and 14th at the Hegster Top Deck number 5 tournaments. So pretty consistent placing for Centiskorch VMAX since rotation has happened. No first place or second place finishes, or even top 4s, but I think Centiskorch VMAX has done really well since rotation has happened. Alright, moving on, let's take a look at Inteleon VMAX. This is a deck archetype that really didn't have anything new come out with Darkness Ablaze, but since rotation happened and Eternatus VMAX is now blasting onto the scene, decks like Dragapult VMAX are not seeing nearly as much play, and for good reason. Inteleon VMAX seems to fill the role of Dragapult VMAX with its damage spread archetype and its pretty consistent energy acceleration, and it seems like a pretty consistent deck so far in all of its placements and all of the games that I played with Inteleon VMAX. It seems honestly to me like a better version of Dragapult VMAX, even though it maybe not has placed as well. If we look at the pros for Inteleon VMAX, of course, the spread damage. So with Max Bullet, you do 160, but it also does 60 damage to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. There are a ton of single-price Pokemon out there that have, less than 60 HP. Decks like Mad Party kind of get beat up really bad with the Max Bullet ability. And a lot of Pokemon have HP, single-price Pokemon have HP of 120, which means that they get sort of 2-hit KO'd on the bench with Max Bullet, which can be really useful with Inteleon for taking multiple prizes in one turn. And it also hits weakness against all of those fire-type decks in the format right now. Decks like Centiskorch VMAX, decks like Blacephalon, and decks like the Mew 3 Welder variant that run a lot of fire-type GX Pokemon. So definitely has a pretty good weakness, or a pretty good, hits for super effective, I guess you could say, against a lot of good decks in the format. And right now it seems to be like in a really good place since rotation has happened. Now, if we go on to the cons, the downsides for Inteleon VMAX, it doesn't really two-hit KO some of the more bulky VMAX Pokemon like Eternatus. Eternatus VMAX has 340 HP, which can be really, really tough with Inteleon VMAX. You are probably going to be running Galarian Zigzagoon in this deck, so that can give you the ability to get the two-hit KO on Eternatus VMAX, but that's not always going to happen, and it's not always going to be super consistent. So that is definitely a downside with Inteleon VMAX. It also doesn't one-shot almost really pretty much any Pokemon V. This is, doesn't seem like a big deal, but it's really a downside. With a Pokemon VMAX, you expect it to do a lot of damage. A lot of them do somewhere in the range of like 220 to 270. So Inteleon VMAX doesn't have the ability to one-shot Pokemon like Zamazenta, like Zacian, and any other Pokemon V that might be seeing a lot of play in the format. This can be a pretty big downside when you're playing Inteleon VMAX. If we look at the results that this deck has placed since rotation has happened, it got 4th at the Players' Cup Finals, which was definitely its best outing out of any of the tournaments so far since rotation has happened. It got 11th at the Hexer Top Deck number 5 tournament and 12th at the Azul GG sub tournament. So the placement has definitely been not bad for this deck, especially since it really wasn't seeing much play or having much success before rotation happened. I think it's definitely sort of evolving as the format sort of evolves here since rotation, has just happened, and I think it's only going to get better as time goes on. So definitely a really good deck. Maybe not the best deck in the format, but a contender for one of the best decks, and definitely belongs in the top 10 spot. Now it is time to take a look at Lucario Melmetal Zacian V deck variant. So Lucario Melmetal Zacian definitely was something that was thought up as soon as Zacian V came out. Zamazenta V has been getting better and better since so many VMAX decks have been popping onto the scene, and especially since rotation happened, decks like Eternatus VMAX, Inteleon VMAX, Centiskorch VMAX, and also a few more are seeing play, which means that Zamazenta is getting better, and Zamazenta only gets better and better with the Lucario Melmetal GX Full Metal Wall GX attack setup. So this deck is all about making it so your Pokemon don't take a lot of damage with that GX attack. Not only can you discard the energies from your opponent's active Pokemon, but you can make it so your metal Pokemon take 30 less damage for the rest of the game. When you combine that with with cards like Metal Goggles, your Pokemon V are not getting one-shotted by some of the better attackers like Eternatus VMAX in the format. And also, they're more than capable of two-shotting those cards. So this deck seems to be just absolutely stellar since the rotation has happened, and it has a lot of really great cards in its toolkit. Cards like Metal Saucer, which help you accelerate energy to Zacian V and Zamazenta. Cards like Turbo Patch, and of course the new inclusion to this deck, the Bronzong. This Bronzong, it has the ability Heat Proof, so it's immune to fire-type attacks. And in this format right now, since rotation has happened, Centiskorch VMAX is becoming pretty popular. Decks like Blacephalon are becoming really popular, so Bronzong can really turn the tides of battle when you're playing this deck and really kind of puts this deck over the edge. If we look at the pros, so it's got great defense. Like I said, all of your Pokemon are taking a lot less damage every time they get attacked, and that can just be a very, very big upside when you're playing this deck. It also has consistent energy, acceleration, and discard synergy with cards like Metal Saucer and Turbo Patch, which you're definitely going to be running in this deck, and that is a very important thing to realize in this deck, because you're kind of stalling while you're taking less damage. You're stalling with Bronzong, but you want to be able to set up your attackers on your bench so that you can switch them in and get the knockouts when you need them. So it can definitely do that pretty consistently as well. And it has great secondary attackers, like I've also said, with Zacian V and Zamazenta V, and maybe even Mawile GX if you're playing it, or the Duraludon, like I said earlier, from Rebel Clash, the single prizer. And a big upside is that new Bronzong tech that makes it able to survive turns against those fire-type Pokemon. Since we do not have Metal Frying Pan anymore in the standard format, that means that we need something to kind of make it a little bit easier for us against those fire-type decks, and Bronzong fills the role perfectly. Now, if we look at the cons, it does have a tough fire weakness, so I know I said that we do have the Bronzong, but the fire weakness is still there. It can still definitely, it can make you lose games against those fire-type decks for sure, and that is definitely a con. But it can, one con is it can get KO'd by Eternatus, and I'm talking about the Lucario Melmetal GX card in its own right. So if you haven't used the GX tech if you haven't used that setup GX attack yet, and you haven't found the metal goggles, it will get one-shotted by Eternatus VMAX, and it can also get one-shotted by Blacephalon. And you definitely need to set up with this deck with Lucario Melmetal GX, so if you're getting one-shotted early or mid in the game, if you can't get that card set up early, then that can really, make you lose the game without you really getting started, which can be a big downside. If we look at the results, though, so in the Player Cup finals that just happened, it got first and second. So those those results definitely don't lie. This deck has bursted onto the scene since rotation happened. It has been placing really well. I'm not sure if it'll have as much longevity as you might think it will with these placements, but I could be wrong. This deck definitely has everything it needs, and it's looking like an absolutely great deck. It's right up there with ADP Zacian, and it might even be better a lot of times in the tournament formats. It got 4th at Pokédex X2 Tag Bolt number 8, which is also a really great placement, and it got 7th, 3rd, and 13th at the Hexter Top Deck 4, and 10th at the Pokédex Tag Bolt number 7. So very consistent placings for Lucario Melmetal GX, and I think that we're going to see a lot of placements like that in the future. Looking forward to playing this deck myself and seeing what it does in the future of the standard format. Now let's take a look at the Decidueye Goons deck. So Decidueye was a card that came out in Darkness Ablaze, and Obstagoon was a card that came out, and a deck that came out from the Sword and Shield base set. Galarian Obstagoon lost some cards from its toolkit, but with the inclusion of Decidueye, when you put them together in this deck, it creates an absolutely disgusting card deck to play against. It's got so many immunities, it's so hard to work around, and you really have to prep for it when you're playing a tournament with any of these other decks that are in the list. If you look at the pros, it's got great control and immunities. Like I said, it's immune. Between Decidueye and Obstagoon, it's immune to Pokemon V, Pokemon GX, VMAXs are included, and basic Pokemon, which is the vast majority of Pokemon that people will be playing in the format, which means that this deck can sort of work around almost any matchup that it'll play against. It's got pretty easy setups as far as, like a couple Stage 2 Pokemon go. You have Turffield Stadium, you have Rosa, and you also have, of course, Rare Candy to get into all of these Stage 2 single prize Pokemon, and it does it pretty consistently, which makes this deck a lot more viable. If you look at the cons for this deck, it can be teched around. So in my ADP Zacian part of this video, I was talking about how I run a Duraludon from Rebel Clash, and with the ADP boost, it does, I think, 140 HP on the dot, which one-shots Decidueye. It's also resistant to Grass, which means that Splitting Arrow doesn't do 90, it does 60, and it has to hit the Duraludon 3 times for it to get knocked out. And if that Duraludon is set up with the ADP boost, you're taking an extra prize, and it's really easy to sort of beat this deck, or at least beat Decidueye with that, Duraludon. Although you do have Obstagoon there, which makes that matchup a little bit more bearable. And it does have for one of the cons, it has a fire weakness, which, isn't super relevant, I guess, in the Centiskorch V matchup or the Blacephalon V matchup, but the fire weakness is there, which makes it easier to sort of put in tech options into your deck and get the one-shot knockouts on Decidueye. It has poor attack strength, so between Galarian Obstagoon and Decidueye, their attacks aren't doing much damage. But again, this deck isn't really focused around getting knockouts as much as it is sort of slowly withering away your opponent until they really can't do anything. So the poor attack strength is going to be a con for this deck, but I don't think that it's that big of a deal. If you look at the results that it's placed, so in the most recent Hexter Top Deck number 6 tournament, just a few days ago from when I'm recording this, it got first, which is actually very impressive for this deck. It seems to have just a really great, kind of workaround in a lot of tournament matchups and a lot of tournament formats, and we saw that at the Hexter Top Deck number 6 tournament. It also got third at the Hexter Top Deck number 4 tournament, which is sort of another nod to its consistency in the tournament format. And it got 9th at the Players' Cup Finals, which is very impressive, seeing how this deck was very new at the time. So very great placements, and I think that this deck is definitely around to stay, and a deck that a lot of people are definitely going to hate playing against. And you guys might be surprised to learn that I have put Pikachu and Zekrom onto this post-rotation top 10 deck list video. And this is for a few reasons. So I know Pikachu and Zekrom has lost a few cards that made this deck very consistent and absolutely busted. So it used to have Electropower, it used to have Thunder Mountain. This deck was by far the best deck in the format for those last few months before the rotation happened. And it was tearing through so many decks and just seemed like it didn't really have any good counters and kind of beat everything that was in the format. But even though it lost those cards, it's still looking like a really great deck, and the placements since rotation happened can kind of, attest to that. If we look at the pros, even after rotation, it has a built-in energy acceleration with its attacks, with Tapu Koko, with Boltund. It kind of has a lot of ways to accelerate energy to Pikachu and Zekrom, which it needs now because it needs to have the 6 energy to use that Tag Bolt GX's attack to its full effect. And it has a great kind of built-in draw engine with the new speed energy that came out. When you play or when you attach that speed energy to one of your electric Pokemon, you get to draw 2 cards. And doing that 4 times in a game can be really useful on top of the Magnolias and on top of the Marnies. The draw engine in this deck, and the Dedennes, of course, the draw engine of this deck is very consistent and very reliable. Of course, the biggest upside to this deck and sort of its key attribute is that you can take multiple prizes and get multiple knockouts with one attack in one turn. That Tag Bolt GX does 170 to one of your opponent's bench Pokemon, so you will be knocking out the Dedennes, and you will be knocking out pretty much any single prizers that's on your opponent's bench. So, of course, probably one of the biggest upsides to this deck. Also, it resists Zacian, so if you get a big charm on this guy, that brings it to 270 HP. And you're also taking 20 less damage from Metal-type Pokemon with its resistance. So having that resistance to Zacian V, one of the best attackers in the format, is definitely always going to be an upside with Pikachu and Zekrom, and kind of keeps it, I think, in that top echelon of decks even after rotation. Some of the cons, though, for Pikachu and Zekrom, it has low HP attackers like Boltund, like Pikachu and Zekrom. This means that this deck is getting one-shotted by a lot of the best decks in the format, or the cards in this deck are getting one-shotted. Decks like, Eternatus VMAX and Centiskorch and, the Welder, the Mew 3 Welder variant, Blacephalon. It's getting one-shotted by a lot of Pokemon, which I think is sort of the big thing keeping this deck away from being one of the better decks in the format at the moment, but I still think that it belongs in the top 10 spot. Another con is that it relies on multiple prize valued Pokemon in the active spot and on the bench, meaning that it relies on the Pikachu and Zekrom heavily. It relies on the Boltund V. It relies on Dedennes on the bench for the draw engine. So it's definitely susceptible to Gust, and since you're relying on all of these low HP multi-prize Pokemon, it definitely can go downhill pretty fast with this deck, especially if your opponent sets up early and gets the boss's orders out. When we go into results, though, with Pikachu and Zekrom, since rotation happened, it still plays 6th and 9th at the Exeter Top Deck number 8 tournament, the most recent one, and also it plays 6th at the Pokédex S2 Tag Bolt number 8. So not incredible results, but pretty consistent results for this deck, considering that it's lost some of its most valuable cards from rotation. A deck that definitely hasn't gotten, better since rotation has happened, but a deck that I think still belongs in the top 10 list. Also, not to mention, with Vivid Voltage coming around in a couple months, it seems like that deck is focused around Electric-type Pokemon, so it seems like there might be some good Electric-type tech cards that are going to be coming out in that set, which might even make this deck a little bit better. Take a look at a deck that I put in this list that I was kind of on the edge on. There was a few decks that I thought could sort of take this last spot on the list. This deck might not be the last deck that I'm featuring in the video, but it was the last deck that I included in this video, and I was sort of torn between a few different decks. I thought about putting the Mad Party deck from Darkness Ablaze in here, and I also thought about putting the Rillaboom, Butterfree, Raw Egg tag team grass deck variant in this list as well. But Vikavolt made the list. It was absolutely terrific before rotation happened, when it had use of all of those all those electric type tech cards like Thunder Mountain and like Electro Power. And if you look at the results, they're third at POG 2020 and fourth at Hegster Top Deck number 1. Those are tournaments that were before rotation. It didn't really have any results since rotation has happened, which you might be asking, like, then why is it on this list if it hasn't been doing well since rotation has happened? Well, to be honest with you, I think this deck is still pretty good. It still has use of Tapu Koko Prism Star, you have Turbo Patch, and you have Cape of Toughness, which make this deck pretty consistent, pretty reliable. And if you look at some of the pros here for this deck, so of course it has Item Lock, LOL. So Item Lock is a very, very powerful ability, and sometimes in tournament you just go against decks that cannot handle the Item Lock. So definitely seems like it's still a very, very great ability to have on this Pokemon. It's got a quick startup, so with the Tapu Koko Prism Star in the Turbo Patch, you can get the first turn going second Item Lock, or just going second in general. You can get the Item Lock pretty consistently, which is definitely an upside with this deck. And it also utilizes a lot of status condition tech cards, which can be very, very useful in this deck and can be a very big difference when you're playing against a lot of other decks in the format. Some cons though, so its weak damage potential is definitely a problem. Paralyzing Bolt only does 90, and then the Super Zap Cannon only does 100, Paralyzing Bolt does 50, and Super Zap Cannon only does 190, but you have to discard 2 energy from this Pokemon, so definitely not a great attacker in terms of damage output. You probably are running Bolt in this deck, and you might be running the Raichu and Raichu Tag Team card, which is a decent attacker in its own right, but it really, compared to the other decks on this list, has pretty weak damage potential. It's also getting KO'd by Eternatus and so many other decks in the format who do big damage. Even with the Toughness Cape, you have 260 HP, and you're getting one-shotted by that full power Eternatus VMAX, which is definitely a big downside with this deck archetype. Also, it's lost a lot of tech cards from rotation, like Electro Power and Thunder Mountain, which means that it's probably not going to be like a top 5 deck in the format right now. But like I mentioned, or like I maybe will mention, with Pikachu, Vivid Voltage, the new set after Darkness Ablaze, is coming out in a few months, and that deck is based around electric-type Pokemon, so that means there's probably going to be a lot of good electric-type tech cards to come out in that set, which means that Vikavolt might be getting a lot better, and so might Pikachu. So that is a big reason why I put Vikavolt on this list, above Mad Party, above Rillaboom, and above really any other deck that you could, or maybe even Spiritomb, other than above any of those other decks that were kind of on the borderline. I did choose Vikavolt because I think that it is still a top 10 deck in the format, and I think that it will only get better with time. So that's it for Vikavolt. And you knew it was going to be on the list, guys. It's baby Blacephalon. So the Blacephalon deck has been sort of stumbling around in the standard format for such a long time now. It's gotten so many great placements, has so many good runs in so many tournaments. I mean, it sort of seems like that sort of like annoying little cousin that never seems to sort of go away. It's always bothering you, wants to play app games on your phone or whatever it might be. Blacephalon is always around and is always causing a nuisance in the standard format. If we look at the pros for this deck, it's got massive damage potential. The Fireball Circus damage, or the Fireball Circus attack there does 50 damage for each fire energy that you discard from your hand. And with things like Giant Hearth and Fire Crystal, you can really load up your hand with fire energy and do easy knockouts on GX, Tag Team Pokemon, and VMAX Pokemon alike. Another upside for this deck is that it's pretty much consistently mainly going to be played by single prize Pokemon. So this means that your opponent is going to have to knock out, at least if it doesn't gust onto things like the Cramorant, or your Oricorio, or whatever other, I guess, 2-prize Pokemon might be on your bench. It's going to have to knock out a bunch of single-prize Pokemon, which, this deck is all about winning the prize race, and if you're playing single-prize Pokemon, it's a lot easier to win that prize race, especially if you can get the knockouts on the bigger Pokemon, like Blacephalon can. It's got great energy acceleration. Of course, it's playing Welder. You're playing Giant Hearth. This deck does rely heavily on Welder, which is a downside that you see there, but it's got great energy acceleration, which means that Fireball Circus is pretty easily done, and the energy acceleration is key to do big damage with this deck, and it has everything it needs to make that happen. Some cons for the deck. So it has a bad Inteleon matchup, so it does get one-shotted by the Inteleon VMAX's attack, and also it's got 120 HP, which means that it gets two-shotted by the spread damage effect of the Inteleon's attack. And it also struggles in the late game, so if you don't get those knockouts early in the game that you need, Even if you're not winning the prize race early on, if it's really late in the game, then it has a pretty tough time late in the game if you don't have your welders anymore, if you don't have Giant Hearth out, if you're out of fire crystals. This deck really can't do much. So it does sort of rely on welder early and mid in the game, and it struggles in the late game once you don't have any of those cards anymore. If we look at the results, though, it did place first at the Hexter Top Deck number 5 tournament, which is a very great placement. I know Blacephalon is always going to be a great option in tournament format, and in this case scenario, it got first at the Hexter Top Deck number 5. It got third at the JGB 2020 annual tournament, which is very impressive. So, being third out of a ton of different decks in that format definitely sort of speaks volumes to how good this deck is still after rotation has happened. It got 15th at the Azul GG Sub-Tourney and 16th at the Pokéx S2 Tag Bolt number 8, which are two also very good placements. So Baby Blacephalon seems to be still here to stay, much to most people's dismay. Didn't mean for that to rhyme, but Blacephalon definitely looking like a great option in a lot of these tournaments since rotation has happened. The next one up here is an oldie but a goodie. So this is going to be the Mewtwo GX Tag Team Welder variant. This deck has been around for a while, and it just seems to like Blacephalon, stay in the format and stay very viable. As long as Welder's around, I think that this deck is going to be very consistent, very fast-paced, and just a very good deck overall. Some of its pros here: it's got great energy acceleration, of course, because of the welders, and it has reliable attacking options. So with Mewtwo GX, you can do the attacks of any of your other GX Pokemon, but you also are running the Reshiram and Charizard, you're running the Incineroar, you're running the Naganadel, so you have the options to use these Pokemon that aren't the Mewtwo and GX tag team. But it has a lot of ways to get into the Mew 3 tag team card anyway, so it's very consistent and reliable in terms of getting those attacks off. And the consistency is just going to be probably the main standout attribute to this deck. So it's very consistent and it's very reliable, and it does what it needs to do almost all of the time. It used to be probably the best deck in the format a little while ago, but right now it's looking like it's still a top 10 deck in the format. Some of its cons. So Decidueye does wall this deck pretty heavily. There aren't going to be that many tech inclusions into this deck that Decidueye goons can't handle, so that is definitely a downside. It is pretty scared of Eternatus VMAX, so Eternatus VMAX does get the one-shot on pretty much every Pokemon in this deck, which is definitely a downside, seeing how Eternatus VMAX is a very popular card right now since rotation has happened. And there's also, in this deck, it seems not a lot of space for other tech item cards. So you're running so many Pokemon and you're running so many cards that help, help boost the consistency of this deck, which means that there's not a lot of variance and not a lot of cards that you can sort of add into this deck without making it less consistent overall. So that is definitely a downside. However, though, let's take a look at the results. So I got first and third at the Pokéx S2 Tag Bolt number 8 tournament, which was kind of a surprise, I think, since the rotation happened. All of a sudden, Mewtwo and Mew tag team welder variant just boomed, and people were like, "Oh no, here we go again." But I think that it's going to probably die down a little bit as some of these other decks become a bit more popular and become a bit more refined. But this deck has been pretty much refined to a fault at the moment. So these results, I guess, are a little bit expected. It got second and third at Azul GG Sub-Tourney, which is also very impressive and very kind of ridiculous this stage in the game. And it got third and fifth at the Hexter Top Deck number 5 tournament. So overall, really consistent and really great placements for this deck. And it seems like it hasn't really gotten any worse as time goes on. And it seems like it's not going to get any worse for a while now. So Mewtwo and Mew Welder variant is definitely around to stay and looks like to be a great option for most tournament formats in the future. But anyway, guys, I want to thank you all for watching this video. It took me a long time to make all of these different panels, all of the graphics, and all of the content that I made in this video. It took a really long time and took a lot of effort. So I really appreciate you guys watching this. Support the channel if you can. Press the subscribe button if you want to see some of my other videos or be notified for other videos in the future. Also, go check out the Twitch channel, which is Twitch TV Chill TCG. We do some live streams there playing against viewers and playing against people from our Discord. And we also are running a new tournament that's coming on Saturdays called the Chill Series. So this is a standard tournament. At the moment, it's free entry, and it's looking to be a really fun tournament. That's also going to be streamed to the Twitch channel. So go check out the Twitch channel if you can. And last but not least, definitely go join the Discord. We have, I think, about 150 people in that Discord right now. Definitely a great community. It's growing really quickly, and I've enjoyed sort of setting up that Discord and keeping it organized. I've enjoyed it a lot. But anyway, guys, that is it. That's the end of the video. I had a great time making this video. I learned a lot, and I hope you guys did too. One thing I want you guys to do, though, especially, so this deck, like I said, it wasn't in order. So these cards weren't ranked in order from 10 to 1 or 1 to 10, but I want you guys to do that for me in the comment section below. So take a look at all of the decks that were in this video and then rank them in the comment section down below, from best to worst, from 1 to 10. That'd be really cool. I'd be really interested to see what you guys rank all these decks as, and I kind of want to see you guys debate in the comment section below. But that's going to be it, guys. I had a great time. I hope you guys did too. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll see you guys next time.